She hadn't spoken a word on the radio in 11 months, until 4 mercenary jets cornered a terrified rookie pilot and dared anyone to save him. What happened in the next 4 minutes shocked even her own commander. This isn't fiction. This is the story they still whisper about, the Ghost Widow's revenge. Before we get into how we got here, comment where you're watching from, and hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The radar warning receiver screamed. Not beeped. Not chirped. Screamed, a shrill, unbroken tone that every fighter pilot on Earth learns to fear before they learn to fly. It meant a targeting radar had found you. It meant, in the next 60 seconds, you might die. Second Lieutenant Marcus Doyle heard that sound and felt his stomach drop through the floor of his cockpit. "Overlord, this is Falcon 6-1, he said, and his voice cracked on the call sign. "I have multiple bandits, unknown origin, converging on my position. Request immediate." He didn't finish the sentence. A shadow crossed his canopy, fast and dark, close enough that his jet bucked in the wake turbulence. 24 years old. 6 weeks out of advanced flight training. Flying a routine patrol over the contested waters of the Kestrel Strait, a stretch of open ocean claimed by 3 different governments and patrolled, in practice, by whoever showed up with the most firepower. Today, that was not Marcus Doyle. 4 aircraft had appeared on his scope in the space of 90 seconds, materializing out of a low bank of storm clouds like they'd been waiting there. Sleek, matte black airframes with no national markings, only a single insignia on each tail, a coiled serpent wrapped around a crown. Veilcrest Dynamics. A private military contractor with more hardware than most air forces and no flag to answer to. They had boxed him in before he'd even registered the threat. High above, inside an orbiting AWACS aircraft, Airman First Class Rene Ortiz watched 4 hostile blips fold around a single friendly icon like a fist closing. "Command, this is Sentry 2, she said, keying her mic with a hand that wasn't quite steady. "We have 4 unidentified contacts, high performance profile, surrounding Falcon 6-1. They came out of nowhere. I don't know how we didn't see them coming." "Copy, Sentry 2. The response came from Colonel Adrian Voss, seated in the command center 300 miles inland, staring at a tactical display that had gone from routine to catastrophic in under 2 minutes. "Get me options. Who's closest?" "Nearest friendly asset is 35 minutes out, sir. We have nothing else in range." Voss closed his eyes for half a second. 35 minutes was a lifetime in a knife fight at 40,000 feet. Marcus Doyle didn't have 35 minutes. He might not have 5. Doyle's radio cracked with an override tone, and a voice slid into his headset, smooth, unhurried, amused. "Little Falcon," the voice said. "You're a long way from your nest." Doyle's hands tightened on the stick. "Unidentified aircraft, you are violating international air corridor protocols. Break contact immediately." Laughter. Warm, easy laughter, the kind that made his skin crawl worse than any threat tone. "Protocols. That's cute." A pause. "My name is Commander Silas Cade. You may not have heard of me, but you will remember this conversation for whatever remains of your career. I have 4 AIM-120s with your engine signature in their brains, and honestly, kid, I'm bored. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to play for a while. You're going to run, and turn, and sweat, and my people are going to take turns seeing how close they can get before I decide we're done. Sound fair?" "This is an act of war," Doyle said, and hated how thin his voice sounded. "No," Cade said pleasantly. "This is Tuesday." Doyle broke hard left, dumping flares, but the 4 black jets moved with a coordination that made his lone Viper look like it was standing still. They weren't attacking. They were hurting him, closing the box a few degrees at a time, letting him burn fuel and nerve in equal measure. Back at command, Colonel Voss slammed a fist onto the console. "Somebody get me an airframe in that sector. I don't care whose it is." "Sir." Ortiz's voice, tight. There's one aircraft on approach vector through that corridor. Just finishing a live fire qualification run. She's 38 minutes from base, fuel state is marginal at best. Who? Ortiz read the tail number off her screen, and for a moment nobody on the command floor said anything at all. Captain Ren Alvarez. The name landed like a dropped wrench. There were pilots who flew for the paycheck, pilots who flew for the thrill, and then there was Ren Alvarez, who flew like she had nothing left to protect and everything left to prove. 11 months earlier, in that same stretch of ocean, Alvarez and her wingman, her husband, Major Diego Alvarez, had been jumped by a Veilcrest patrol running the exact same intimidation tactics. Diego's jet had taken a missile meant for her. She'd watched it happen in her mirror, watched the fireball bloom where his aircraft used to be, and she'd flown the rest of that mission on autopilot and rage, landing a jet so shredded by shrapnel that maintenance had simply towed it to the scrap yard without comment. She'd come back to flight status 4 months later. Nobody had stopped her. Nobody had really tried. She didn't talk in the ready room anymore. She didn't laugh at the jokes. She flew with a stillness that unsettled instructors twice her rank, pushing airframes past their structural limits like she was daring them to fail her. The other pilots had a name for her, spoken quietly, half in respect and half in something closer to fear. Ghost Widow. Get her on the line, Voss ordered. The connection crackled open. Command, this is Viper 4-4, Alvarez said. Flat. Unhurried. As if she already knew what was coming. Run. Voss dropped rank, dropped protocol, because there wasn't time for either. Falcon 6-1 is surrounded. 4 Veilcrest fighters, Kestrel Strait, and the flight lead identifies himself as Silas Cade. Silence on the line. Long enough that Voss checked his display to make sure the connection hadn't dropped. I heard you, Alvarez said finally. You're 38 minutes from home plate and running on fumes already. If you divert into that fight and it goes wrong, there's no rescue coming for you either. I need you to understand what I'm asking. You're not asking anything, Colonel. Her voice hadn't changed pitch at all. I already turned. On the radar display, the icon representing Viper 4-4 peeled off its return heading and arced hard toward the strait, and then, a heartbeat later, blinked out of existence. She's dark, Ortiz said, staring at the blank space where the friendly contact had been. Transponders off. IFF's off. She's gone fully passive. She wasn't a registered aircraft anymore. She was a rumor with a full weapons load. Alvarez dropped her jet to 50 feet above the wave tops and firewalled the throttle, riding a knife edge between speed and suicide. At this altitude, sea clutter and the curve of the Earth would swallow her radar signature completely, but one bad gust, one misjudged swell, and the ocean would do Silas Cade's job for him. She didn't think about that. She thought about the shape of Diego's aircraft the last time she'd seen it whole. Overhead, Cade's voice rolled across the open channel, directed at Doyle but broadcast wide enough for anyone listening. Command, if you've got a rescue party assembling, you should know it's a bit of a drive. I'll even wait. Consider it sporting. Doyle, sweat soaked and burning through his last countermeasures, keyed his mic with a voice gone ragged. Nobody's coming. That's the spirit, Cade said. 30 miles out, skimming the water at speeds that would have torn a lesser pilot's confidence apart, Ren Alvarez heard the exchange and said nothing. She jettisoned her external tanks, felt the jet leap lighter beneath her, and kept the throttle buried. Cade grew tired of the game early. Copperhead 2, you have the shot. Make it quick. One of the black jets slid in behind Doyle's tail, reticle settling, finger closing on the trigger. And the ocean exploded upward beneath him. Alvarez's Viper came out of the sea spray like something that had been waiting there for a year, hauling 9 Gs into a vertical climb that put her directly under the mercenary's blind spot. His radar warning receiver gave him less than a second of notice, barely enough to register the tone before an AIM-9 came off her wingtip rail and found his tailpipe at point-blank range. The explosion turned the sky orange. "Copperhead 2 is down," someone screamed over the open channel. "Where the hell did that come from?" Doyle flew straight through the debris field, too stunned to process what had just happened, while Cade wrenched his own jet into a violent evasive brake. "Identify yourself," he snapped. "Who is flying that aircraft?" Alvarez didn't answer. She rolled inverted, pulled back down into the churn of the fight, and let the mercenaries scramble to find a threat they couldn't get a clean lock on. Aboard the AWACS, Ortiz was on her feet. "She's in the merge." One splash, 3 hostiles remaining. Voss gripped the console edge hard enough to whiten his knuckles. "Talk to me, run." She didn't respond to that either. She had switched her radio to the open guard channel, Cade's channel, and was listening to him bark orders at his remaining wingmen, his composure fraying with every word. "Spread out," Cade was saying. "2 circle the, no. No, bracket her. Force her into the vertical, she can't outturn all of us." Alvarez keyed her mic. "You wanted a challenge, Cade." The line went dead silent on his end. "Who is this?" he demanded, and for the first time there was a tremor under the arrogance. "You should remember," she said. "You were laughing when you killed my husband 11 months ago in this exact airspace. I heard you do it. I've heard it every night since." Cade's voice, when it came back, had lost every trace of amusement. "That's not possible." Alvarez went down. "I didn't," she said. "I'm the widow you made. And I'm collecting." She cut the channel and put her cannon to work. The second wingman, a pilot callsign Pharaoh who had made the mistake of turning to engage her one-on-one, never got a shot off. Alvarez closed inside 1,000 feet, flying on instinct rather than radar, and walked a burst of 20mm fire directly into his wing route. The mercenary jet snapped into an uncontrollable spin, its pilot ejecting seconds before the airframe tore itself apart. "2 down," she said, to no one. Her fuel warning light had been on for 4 minutes. She ignored it the way she'd learned to ignore most things. The third wingman, callsign Dax, tried the oldest trick in the book, a vertical rope a dope meant to bleed her energy and stall her out. It might have worked against anyone flying to survive. Alvarez wasn't. Stripped of her tanks and running on a fuel load barely worth mentioning, her jet had a thrust-to-weight ratio that turned the climb into a rocket run instead of a fight. She caught him at the top of his own maneuver, missile growl turning into a locked tone, and put her last sidewinder through his exhaust before he understood he'd made a mistake. 3 down. 1 to go. It was just her and Silas Cade now, the storm clouds thinning around them, the ocean gray and endless below. "Cross, Alvarez, whoever you are," Cade said, and his voice had gone thin and fast, all performance stripped away. "This is insane. You don't have the fuel to make it home even if you win. Break off. We both walk away." Alvarez said nothing. She'd used her last missile. She had 90 rounds of cannon ammunition left and a fuel gauge sitting on empty. She leveled off, found his silhouette against the breaking clouds, and pointed her nose straight at him. Cade broke first, hauling his jet around into a head-on pass, choosing the fight because the alternative, running from a woman who apparently could not be killed, was worse for what remained of his nerve. They closed on each other at a combined speed near 1,500 miles an hour, 2 aircraft on a collision course neither one intended to survive losing. This was how Diego had died. A head-on pass against a heavier, better-armed jet, forced to choose between colliding and exposing himself. He'd flinched. Cade's cannon fire had done the rest. Alvarez did not flinch. At the last possible instant, close enough that Cade could see the shape of her helmet through his windscreen, his nerve broke instead. He yanked his stick hard to avoid the collision, rolling his aircraft's belly into her gun sight for less than a second. A second was enough. She squeezed the trigger and held it, spending the last of her ammunition in a single continuous burst that tore through his canopy and cockpit before he ever got a hand near the ejection handle. His jet folded in on itself, engine flaming out mid-collapse, and came apart in a spreading bloom of fire against the gray sky. Alvarez flew straight through the smoke of it. On the other side, her engine died. No warning beyond what had already been screaming at her for 10 minutes, just a sudden, total silence where a howling turbine had been, replaced by the eerie hiss of wind over a dead airframe. "Command, this is Viper 4-4, she said, and her voice, for the first time in 11 months, had something soft in it. Splash 4. Airspace clear." Cheering broke out across the command floor. Voss didn't join it. "Ren, status. Flamed out, altitude 12,000 and falling. I'm a glider, Colonel. Rescue's already airborne, they're tracking your descent. Eject. You brought that kid home. Get out of the aircraft." She looked out at the horizon, where the storm had finally broken and a seam of gold light was spilling across the water. Somewhere behind her, Marcus Doyle was limping his battered Viper back toward land, alive because a woman with nothing left to lose had decided that was not going to be true for much longer. She touched the small silver ring hanging beside her dog tags. "Copy, Command," she said. "Viper 4-4, punching out." She pulled the handle. The canopy blew clear, the seat fired, and the sky took her, parachute blooming white against the gray, drifting down toward rescue boats already cutting wakes through the swells below. Behind her, her empty jet nosed over and slid silently into the Atlantic, taking the last of the Ghost Widow's fury down with it. The water was colder than she expected, even through the survival suit, and for a moment after she hit the swells Ren Alvarez simply floated there, staring up at a sky that had gone the color of washed slate, and let herself breathe. She could hear the rescue helicopter before she saw it, the low thud of rotors cutting through wind and wave noise, growing louder. A rescue swimmer hit the water 30 yards off and closed the distance in a few hard strokes, checking her harness, checking her eyes, asking questions she answered on reflex without really hearing them. Name, rank, injuries, she had none that a corpsman could chart. They winched her up into the cabin, wrapped her in a thermal blanket she didn't need, and nobody said much of anything on the flight back. The crew chief kept glancing at her like she might dissolve if he looked too long, the way you'd look at something you'd only ever heard described secondhand. Marcus Doyle was already on the tarmac when they landed, still in his flight suit, helmet under one arm, looking like a man who had aged 5 years in 40 minutes. He started toward her the moment her boots touched the ground, then stopped a few feet short, unsure of the protocol for thanking someone who had just killed 4 people to keep you alive. "Captain," he said. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Alvarez said, not unkindly. "Get some sleep. Write your report. Fly again tomorrow. Will you be there?" She considered the question longer than he expected. "I'll be there," she said, and for the first time since the debrief began, something in her face came close to a smile, not warm, not yet, but no longer entirely closed off either. In the command center, Colonel Voss watched the gun camera footage twice before he said anything at all. 4 kills, 3 missiles, 1 cannon pass, all inside 11 minutes, flown on a fuel load that should have put her in the water 30 miles short of the fight. On paper it read like fiction. On the recorder, it was simply what had happened. "Recommendation, sir?" Ortiz asked, still logging the mission data, her hands not quite steady even now. Voss didn't answer right away. Veilcrest Dynamics would deny everything, as they always did, no flag, no accountability, for aircraft and 4 pilots that would simply cease to exist on any registry that mattered. Silas Cade's name would appear in exactly 0 official incident reports. The strait would stay contested, and somewhere another company would eventually try the same thing again, because that was the nature of a border nobody wanted to enforce and everybody wanted to exploit. But not today. Not this stretch of water, not this patrol, not while Ren Alvarez was flying it. "Debrief her when she's ready," Voss said finally. And somebody find out what that kid needs, because he's not the only one who's going to be flying scared out there for a while. He looked back at the tactical display, now empty and quiet, for red icons gone from the board as cleanly as if they'd never existed. Log it as a successful defensive engagement, he said. And somebody get Captain Alvarez a hot meal. She's earned it. That night, in the small room she kept at the edge of the base, Ren Alvarez sat on the end of her bunk and turned the silver ring over in her fingers, the way she did most nights, though tonight felt different in a way she couldn't quite name. The fear that had lived in her chest for 11 months, the fear that had driven every reckless maneuver, every G-load that should have blacked her out, every silence in the mess hall, had not vanished exactly. But it had loosened its grip, just slightly, for the first time since the water had closed over Diego's aircraft. She had not saved him. Nothing she did today could undo that. But she had stood in the same sky, against the same enemy, and this time she had walked away, and so had the boy she'd been sent to save. Outside her window, the storm that had chased her across the strait had finally broken apart entirely, scattering into a clear night sky littered with more stars than she'd bothered to notice in almost a year. Tomorrow there would be another patrol. Another briefing. Maybe, eventually, another version of Silas Cade, because men like him rarely stayed gone for long and the strait would always draw more of them. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, Ren Alvarez slept without dreaming of fire.